If you're from the United States like me, have you ever wondered why so many of our commercial spaces look like this? Whereas almost everywhere else in the world, their commercial spaces look more like this? Or have you ever thought about why so many Americans don't buy bread from their local bakeries? Why most of us don't have neighborhood corner stores? Or why we quit visiting small businesses in general? For many people in the United States, the shopping routine has become a well-worn path. You get in the car, you drive to a big box store located in a lifestyle center, strip mall, or other car-dependent establishment, and then you go ahead and buy all your goods from shampoo and dog toys to canned tuna, all within the same establishment. However, the American shopping scene didn't always look like this. Before the mid-20th century, the United States was mostly run by family-owned businesses. So what made it transform into what many consider a franchise and chain store metropolis? An overlooked cause of this phenomenon is city planning. The way we plan our communities has a major influence on where and how people spend money, and plays a significant role in determining whether certain businesses will succeed or fail. Even though many Americans consider small businesses the embodiment of the free market, its urban design doesn't seem to represent that in many cases. And in this video, we'll be discussing how our poor city planning is pulling us further away from this philosophy and into its chain and franchise fixation. Some of you watching this video might be thinking, hey, urban design isn't the only reason we have so many chains and franchises. And that's true. The United States' dependence on big businesses stems from multiple factors. However, the physical environment that we created provides the ideal conditions to foster larger enterprises' success. So let's delve into a little history session to go over the origins of these big businesses and how city planning sustained their operations. Before the Industrial Revolution, people either produced their own goods or purchased them locally from nearby vendors. However, the Industrial Revolution's introduction to less expensive factory-produced goods changed that. But even with the introduction of cheaper mass-made products, local businesses still remain the primary source of goods for most people. And in fact, retailing was largely a decentralized industry during the 20th century, with the commercial scene still being made up of small independent stores owned by local entrepreneurs. It was the mid-21st century when the United States really began to see a shift from the focus from small to big businesses. Around this time, Euclidean zoning was being implemented, along with the iconic American dreams pro-suburb and pro-car publicity. This combined with the baby boom and the trend of families moving to car-dependent Euclidean zone suburbs provided an ideal environment for the growth of big businesses. Hence, it was at this time that the franchising frenzy took over, with everything from auto supplies to hotels and plumbing becoming franchised. And as people relied more on cars for transportation, fast food restaurants and retail chains became even more convenient in the suburbs, where they were visible and accessible by car. And bit by bit, the shopping scene looked less like this and more like this. Since then, the number of franchises in the United States experienced immense growth over the years, resulting in a boom in big boxes and chain businesses, relatively recent concepts, which displaced the long-standing tradition of supporting local mom-and-pop shops. So how does suburban development and urban sprawl serve as the perfect hatcheries for big businesses? In my previous video, Why We Can't Walk Anywhere Anymore, we went over how Euclidean zoning is detrimental to walkability, in which we discussed how Euclidean zoning's separation of residential to commercial zones and favoring of large lots and lower density virtually makes traveling anywhere by foot from your home a challenge. And this car dependency and lack of walkability can impact how we shop. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is how the car-dependent commute can deter the exploration of smaller enterprises. Compared to walking, the car-dependent commute is a multi-step process and often riskier. This high-maintenance form of commute can discourage people from making the effort of stopping at smaller and more local businesses. This is because many find that once they've gone through the trouble of operating a heavy vehicle at high speeds over long distances in all kinds of environmental conditions while sharing the roads with others, they're much less likely to go through the hassle of repeating that process over again by driving farther distances to support local businesses. Short walkable blocks also encourage pedestrians to make frequent turns and alternating routes, which encourages the public to explore the development even more, making the operation of stopping at new destinations much more effortless and less intricate. Although this trend may not apply to every small business, it's a prevalent pattern that has been observed, particularly for small recreational businesses that are not primarily focused on necessity. To illustrate this point, let's consider the experience of stumbling upon a small recreational business in two different settings, a car-dependent stroad versus a walkable main street. In a Strode, the act of even initially spotting this small business is much more difficult, since car-dependent spaces don't allow for the time to notice smaller establishments due to moving at higher speeds and the need to focus on driving. Small businesses are often hidden by the visual noise from the surrounding developments, hindering the chances of discovery for passengers. In addition to the challenge of noticing small businesses, the process of getting to them is much more difficult in car-dependent areas. If one was in the middle of a Strode, they would have to change lanes. Then they would have to locate the entrance to the power center, lifestyle center, or strip mall where the business is located. Then they would have to find a parking spot, in which the walk from their car to the business is often uncomfortable due to the heat islands caused by the asphalt and concrete of the parking lot. Then, after exploring the business, one would have to walk back to the car and merge into the road. And in the unfortunate case of missing the entrance to a small enterprise, it would require traveling a significant distance to legally make the turns to drive back to the location. On the main street, it's much easier to access. To visit the shop, one would simply need to stop walking. And if they've already passed it, they just have to turn around and walk back to the shop. It's as simple as that. Lindsay Jean-Louis is an urban planner for Urban Design Studios in West Palm, Florida, who could provide us with some insight on this matter.
You might have a plaza on one side of the intersection, and on the other side of the intersection, you're going to go to the one that you could just make a right turn into. You know, you're not going to want to make that U-turn. You're not going to want to wait for traffic, blah, blah. And even though these developments are right across the street from each other in the same exact space, you know, humans, we like convenience. So we're going to continue going to that same place where it's less turns, quicker to get to, where in a true walkable community where it's easy to cross the street, where you could explore everything, you don't have to be limited to that decision. It's literally all within your access. Again, it's that variety, having access to all of that, where you don't have to make a decision because you're in a vehicle and you have to do the easier thing.
This is why smaller recreational businesses often thrive in pedestrian-oriented areas. Mixed-use walkable spaces also create a better experience for pedestrians and shoppers by encouraging them to stay longer. Since traditional developments have more space unoccupied by parking and large lot development, areas like these encourage the flexibility to build centerpieces, patios, parquettes, outdoor seating, and pockets of retail or restaurants. And when people choose to stay in these areas longer, they are more likely to visit smaller businesses and spend their money there. So long story short, small businesses thrive in more walkable areas, and consumers prefer to visit small businesses in walkable areas. This phenomenon is a big reason why recreational niche establishments get looked over and often fail in car-dependent areas. Something else that really must be emphasized is how so many small enterprises heavily rely on foot traffic. In many cases, business owners closely monitor foot traffic because it directly correlates to higher sales and revenue. Locations with higher foot traffic are desirable for small shops and commercial developments, which often result in their higher rents.
The first thing I think about with foot traffic is, I think of South Florida, and South Florida is one of the biggest examples of suburban strip mall development and 4-lane roads everywhere. We have these big signs, yeah, but it's a limited amount of time to really process what's there. Which again, I go back to saying you're going to do what's efficient and convenient and what you already know. In a walkable community where, you're walking down the strip, you're gaining information and sort of picking up on every single establishment that's there. Each space becomes more valuable because everybody has eyes on it. That way they'll get more business, as opposed to being a new development. Like, foot traffic definitely helps small businesses if you're in the right space, because just the visibility is gonna skyrocket. Because if you're walking at a normal space, you're gonna see exactly what's there. You might stop to peek inside. And even if you're not a patron of that business in that moment, you'll sort of analyze and you'll kind of know what's there for maybe another time that you decide to visit.
However, with traditional pedestrian-oriented spaces becoming increasingly rare, competitions for these high foot traffic areas have intensified, which in many cases resulted in even higher rents, taxes, and more intense competition to acquire space in these areas. The decline in foot traffic disproportionately affects smaller businesses. In contrast, big businesses, with their established reputations, better funding, and marketing, are less often dependent on foot traffic, hence is why they can thrive in car-dependent spaces. Small local businesses located in car-dependent areas face a significant disadvantage as they are often overshadowed by the visual clutter of corporate establishments advertising to drivers, or are tucked away in strip malls, power centers, and lifestyle centers, making them difficult to spot from afar. Oftentimes, in car-dependent communities, big boxes and chain outlets are the only options available when it comes to commercial establishments that are convenient to the masses. Many find that big box stores are convenient because you only need to park your car once, and then you could get everything done in one stop. People could get their lawnmowers, cheese, bed sheets, and even personal services like optometry all within short distances from one another. On the other hand, if we look at walkable communities, big boxes aren't as essential, because people could easily access a variety of specialty shops along a single street, block, or avenue. Chain stores are also very convenient in car-dependent spaces, because the familiarity and reputation of well-known brands are more important in automobile-oriented areas. Since driving doesn't give people as much flexibility to easily stop from one place to another to explore new commercial developments, they want to stick with the places they already know are reliable and legitimate. An example of this is how studies show that locations with higher car dependency have higher chain restaurant market shares. This is because the act of viewing commercial areas behind a windshield can alter people's perceptions of businesses and commercial spaces. When driving in a car-dependent town, the only information about restaurants that can be extracted is from a quick glance at signage or a cluster of logos on the highway, hence limiting the amount of information people can gather about the establishments. This is why so many car-dependent areas encourage people to choose chain restaurants, even if they aren't the best. When going to a chain restaurant, people know what they're going to get because of their already established reputation, instead of having to play the guessing game of visiting smaller uncharted restaurants hidden behind the visual clutter of car-oriented development. Those who spend a lot of time behind the wheel often base their dining choices on what is visible from their car, which puts national chains at an advantage over local independent businesses in car-intense spaces. In contrast, many local businesses have a better chance at thriving in walkable communities where pedestrians have the luxury to pause and take in the finer details, such as the appearance of the establishment, the window displays, its upkeep, the ambiance, the menu, etc.
When I think of heavy traffic and a lot of lanes in the road and high speeds, that's when you start thinking of, you see the Publix sign, you see the Walmart sign. And then from a restaurant standpoint, you get your Chili's, your Applebee's. Like, even think about the drive-through model that, again, are the furthest thing from mom and pop or small businesses, but they have a business model that succeeds in areas that are heavily traversed by vehicles. The chain franchises definitely have the benefit where they'll probably succeed anywhere. But I would definitely say though that the large businesses and large franchises, they probably aren't affected regardless if they're in a heavy, automobile traffic or walkable mixed use area, because they have that recognition and they'll get the patronage regardless. But I feel like the smaller businesses that are in the high high traffic corridor areas, I feel like they're harmed a bit.
The misuse of land dedicated to parking can also have a massive financial effect on small businesses. Many developments in suburban space are mandated to take up more land to establish a minimum average size lot, which can constrain the overall density that a developer can achieve. It can also hurt small businesses located in these urban sprawl-like spaces because they must pay for the maintenance and overall acquisition of this land. Maintaining land-intensive space like this is burdensome because there are so many variables that need to be operated. Alan Kossoff is an architect in the Syracuse area, and he can explain the many costs and expenses that are needed to regulate land-intensive, low-density developments.
Regarding parking, the zoning ordinances typically require so many square feet of building per parking space. So let's say commercial buildings, you're required to have one parking space for every 100 square feet of commercial floor area. And in many cases, it's much more parking areas than is necessary to operate the building.
Parking minimum requirements are overly enforced, resulting in large portions of the parking lot going unused. In 2010, civil engineers at the University of California published the first comprehensive estimate of parking spaces in America, determining that there are 500 million empty parking spaces in America at any given time. Parking covers more acres of urban America than any other one thing.
Now, talking about maintenance, parking lots, especially up north, have to be coated much more frequently than they are in the south. So that might require a coating of just a black paint, or it might require an inch of asphalt rolled over it. That means that they'll have to live with a paving which in some cases is breaking down, has cracks in it, water gets in it, water goes under it. The water might go all the way down into the earth below the parking lot and not be a problem. In freezing weather, obviously it can't go drain down, so it tends to freeze and raise the paving and pop it up. So in northern climates, it's quite expensive to maintain these parking lots because they have to repave portions of it.
And small businesses are not exempt from being subject to over-enforcement of minimum lot requirements. This leaves business owners feeling burdened by an expense that isn't really being used and that they were forced to own. Maintaining a parking lot comes with various costs, such as seal coating, crack filling, and the need for regular maintenance of sewer and drainage systems. Below, I've attempted to create a chart illustrating the expenses involved in sustaining a surface parking lot, one of the cheaper types of parking lots compared to underground parking lots or multi-level parking garages. While this chart may not be entirely precise, its goal is just to show that maintaining a parking lot is an ongoing, costly process. And funny enough, I still left out a bunch of expenditures, such as security camera installations, monitoring services, liability insurance, its taxes for acquiring this extra piece of land, and other expenses. I think most can see how and why this might be an issue for smaller businesses and startups. In car-dependent spaces, apart from being less visible and accessible to the masses, small business owners find themselves forced to divert their hard-earned income into designated parking spaces for customers, leaving less room for investment in essential supplies and additional selling space. Furthermore, they may face exclusion from certain areas due to inadequate parking availability. Many less affluent enterprises struggle to meet parking minimums, especially in downtown areas, where aspiring entrepreneurs may need to purchase neighboring buildings solely to demolish them to provide the required off-street parking. This obstacle prevents business owners from opening establishments in high visibility and high foot traffic areas. A clear example of the impact of parking minimums on small businesses is evident in Fayetteville, Arkansas. For decades, numerous buildings remained vacant because complying with parking laws was too expensive. However, in 2015, Fayetteville made a change and became one of the first U.S. cities to remove parking minimums for commercial properties citywide. This change led to a boom in small businesses that previously couldn't have formed. Similar benefits were observed in Sandpoint, Idaho, a resort town that abolished parking minimums for its downtown in 2009 and then later reduced them citywide. This reform made building renovations and redevelopments more affordable for small business startups. Many success stories emerged from this change, as they seized the opportunity to revitalize vacant spaces without the burden of excessive parking regulation. Car-dependent communities are often the ideal breeding ground for large corporations, but can serve as the graveyard for smaller businesses. And this shift away from small businesses is reminiscent of the decline of the mom-and-pop business culture the United States used to once have. With less and less people buying bread from their neighborhood bakery or getting clothes from their local tailor, and instead are submitting to larger chain stores. Just in general, it's almost like there's a war against small businesses. The environment officials created and the policies they've enforced make having independent establishments harder.
You have these rules set in place where there's zones that are only residential, there's zones that are only commercial, there's zoned industrial, there's zones that are zoned office. The portion of the zoning map that can be mixed use, it's typically minimal. In these zoning maps, if you see yellow, that's typically residential, and if you see red, that's typically commercial. You're gonna see a whole lot of single family yellow, you're gonna see on the commercial strips your reds, But as far as areas that you could actually say, hey, let's put in some office and some commercial, a lot of times that has to go through a process, and it's for the simplest stuff. The way our zoning regulations are written, it's hard to do anything by right. So say you have a development, maybe it's like a drive-through in a certain area. A lot of times zoning regulations will say this use is permitted but only with city commission approval. So even if you could do the use, that's a 6 to 9 month process of preparing the application, getting staff review, going to the public hearing, getting it approved at the public hearing, and then you have whatever time it takes to get your permits. So you're looking at a year or two for something that is probably pretty intuitive, where the average person would say, hey, that's okay to be there. Maybe you have to get an approval to rezone a property. Maybe something used to be just a multifamily district and they want to do something commercial there. You have to rezone that into a mixed use. And you also have to get the land use under it changed. So between rezoning processes, a lot of times you have to get a variance or a waiver. There are situations where maybe a client who's worked in a different country are used to just being able to getting permits on something quick, making changes off of the cuff and updating their program every day. And then they come to the States and they try to approach the process the same way, or they think that they can get their approval in the same fashion, and they get a smack on the wrist multiple times from the municipality that they're in, because there's so much, not only standards and regulations that they have to follow, but timely processes to make it happen, because there's so many reviewing bodies, there's so many things that have to get checked for compliance. The American process is definitely more timely and harder to get this one use approved, just because there's so much to have to comply with.
And that could be discouraging for people wanting to start independent or new businesses or projects, right?
Yeah, specifically in the realm of, zoning regulations as it relates to, like, again, square footage, or like what you can and can't have as an accessory structure. It's very discouraging. It would just be way too much of a heavy lift for one single property owner to spend the money on the applications to rezone to do that. Say you have like a single family home or something. A lot of times it's not even the zoning regulations, it's stuff in like the HOA documents that'll prevent you from doing like a lot of like things. But yeah, you wouldn't be allowed to like put a food truck out there and just operate out of that. Maybe you have like a small business or just your typical retail space where maybe you want to build out or add some square footage, like maybe like 1,000 square feet. A lot of times you have to look at, do you have a site plan approval? In that specific situation, your site plan would be on file with whatever that city's zoning division is, and are you allowed to add that square footage? Would that square footage bump you over the FAR? Do you have to do an administrative site plan amendment or a major site plan amendment? And once the average layperson starts having to get faced with all those questions, it can get discouraging, just because people don't realize how much of a process there is to it. And again, some of the regulations are for good reason, but it makes a lot of, small things, difficult.
Even something as simple as converting your own property into a business, like converting part of your home into an ice cream parlor, became even more unattainable, because even with proper licensing, one wouldn't be able to do so unless they file a zoning reform to the government, which can cost thousands of dollars and require you to ask your local zoning board for an application to petition to notify the public regarding your rezone. However, many countries in Europe have a much more flexible approach. In many instances, they view your property as your property, and you should have the liberty to do what you want with it, as long as if it doesn't harm the public. With these kinds of policies in place, it can be easy to see why some people think American zoning protocols discourage the existence of small or family businesses, and instead are hatcheries for larger retails who have the resources and mechanisms to navigate these zoning obstacles. With studies from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance and the Harvard Business Review showing that small businesses have been stagnant when it comes to prevalence, and the gravitation towards larger businesses has been increasing. So what's the big deal with small businesses? How can tiny enterprises like these possibly help our economy more than our giant dominant chains? Small businesses often make greater economic contributions to their local economy because larger corporations generally use external services for tasks, such as accounting, legal work, maintenance, and supply, which are typically relocated outside the local region or even outside the country. On the other hand, small businesses usually outsource these functions to local professionals, which helps circulate money within the community. When a customer spends money at a small business, that money is used to pay a local employee, who will then spend that money locally, creating a cycle that keeps money and energy within the community. Small businesses are typically more nimble than large businesses. By often using tighter-knit teams and simpler communication channels, they can change their operations more quickly and with less investment. This makes them more adaptable to economic uncertainty. Furthermore, small businesses and startups tend to encourage the entrepreneurial mindset and bring new ways of thinking and fresh perspectives to the community. They also contribute to the development of a location's unique character, attracting tourists and larger crowds. Many say that small businesses epitomize the creative potential of the free market by providing a platform for the underdogs to survive. But for small businesses to thrive, they must have easy access to customers. Although the connection between city planning and small businesses might seem insignificant in the grand scheme of things, the interdependence between them is remarkable. And this isn't just the only thing that urban planning impacts. So many aspects of our lives are intertwined with the community's planning, such as our commute, community engagement, leisure activities, health, environment, and overall quality of life. The thing I find so fascinating about urban planning is how it can reflect the community's beliefs and priorities. And this is something that can be traced throughout history. For instance, the Romans emphasized control and organization by promoting the rectangular grid of streets and central forums. The Aztecs reflected their desire to mirror the organization of the universe by dividing their capital Tenochtitlan into 4 quarters representing the cardinal directions. The capital of the Western Han Dynasty, Xi'an, demonstrated its priority on Confucianism authority and centralized power by placing its imperial palace in the central area. City planning mirrors the values and beliefs of a community, but American zoning policies often fall short of capturing this essence. Maybe this type of city planning actually does reflect American values, but studies show otherwise. The truth is, many Americans don't want to live in a society that solely caters to cars and big businesses, and more Americans are expressing this. Lastly, altering these policies won't just benefit business owners, but it'll benefit consumers as well. We honestly deserve better, and urban planning should reflect who we are as a community, what we support, and what we prioritize.